I'll have some of this bourbon. So this is a new foot log that's been put across the top of Little River Trail up about 4 miles. The two people who put that in, sort of a little bit on the quiet side, she'll remain nameless, but I think it's a pretty good bridge. Nice handrail. So we'll turn a little bit more back to some of the travel in the park. Bruce Moorhead was a park biologist here, a friend of mine, and he was always on my case saying, well, you just don't look around enough when you're traveling. So these pictures are for Bruce. This is a nice buck up at Gladys Lake in Grand Valley. There's a nice goat at 11 Bull Basin in the Bailey Range on the backside of Mount Carey. This nice black bear in Martin's Park up out of the North Fork of the Quinault. Some of the boys in Noyes Basin. This marmot just coming out and enjoying the sunshine and the green grass at Lake Lillian. If you get down close, some of the smaller animals, this is a frog in Noyes Basin, but they're all over the park, as you can imagine. And this nice bumblebee. This picture was taken by my son, Scott. And then there are the flowers. Anybody know what this is? Yeah, this is a shooting star. This is in the Queets Basin. And then I have my own wildflower here. And this is in the Lillian Basin. And Martha taught me a lot about the flowers. And one question I always asked her was, is this edible? Because I wanted to know if I could eat them if I ever ran out of food. So that was a standard question. And this is tiger lily. What's this? Prairie smoke. Yep, this is up on the Grand Ridge. Monkey flower in Meany Basin. Pat Willett, you tell me if I'm wrong. I know you're back there. Indian paintbrush. Interesting about Indian paintbrush is that it grows partially on roots of other plants, so it's very difficult to transplant. Cascade of wildflowers in 11 Bull Basin between Mount Stephen and Carey. Sitka columbine. Lupin in Meany Basin, looking at Jeffers in Hubert Glacier and Hermes. And I guess you know that Jeffers Glacier was named after Joseph Jeffers, a photographer from Olympia, who died in a crevasse, but he actually died in a crevasse on Hubert Glacier, but this Jeffers Glacier was named for him. Penstemon in Meany Basin. Bog orchid. Bog orchid is one of my favorite flowers. It has such a nice, sweet smell. It lives along streams, early, moist conditions. So this is Elephant's Head in Lost Basin. Silky Phacelia at the lake that's between Pulitzer and Mount Ferry. Avalanche lily in Lost Basin. And if you've never been in Lost Basin, in the height of the season, when the wildflowers are out, you miss something because they're just blankets and blankets of avalanche lily, and it looks kind of like this. And meadow after meadow like that. Now you can do the Lost Basin trip in a day, but probably better in a couple nights. But you can actually go from Obstruction to Lake Lillian to Lost Basin, and there are 2 lakes that they have at Lost Basin. It's very nice. Come back, go over Cameron Pass and down, up to Grand Pass and out. It's a bit of a long day, but you cover a lot of ground. And you see some really wonderful things. This is blue gentian on the Skyline Trail. This flower is named for King Gentian of Illyria, or something like that, in ancient times, because he thought this flower had medicinal properties. This is Indian pipe. Grows in the shade and moist ground. It actually grows on a fungus, and the fungus grows on a root. This is Piper's bellflower, and it's endemic to the park, as you know. This is up on Klahani Ridge, and if you ever thought that the Olympics was Church of the Great Outdoors, look at the shadow on the right-hand side. This is Calypso. This is my favorite flower. It's a beautiful orchid. Grows in shade, mossy duff. It's named after the sea nymph Calypso, which is of Homer's Odyssey, and she enticed Odysseus on his way back from Troy. So we'll change gears a little bit here and talk about the Chrysler Traverse, or the Bailey Traverse. This is Herb Chrysler in 1930, and he had made a bet with Mr. Bach of Seattle Daily Times that he could survive in the Olympics for a month without any food. And he only took a knife and an ice axe, no matches. He was dressed like this. He had a coat and a homemade sleeping bag and a poncho, and that was it. And in that cage on top, he had 3 pigeons. So that was supposed to be the communication. He started at Olympic Hot Springs and went up went up the Soluk and then down the Bailey Range over to Olympus and wandered around. He wasn't sure where he was all the time. He about died. He ate berries, ate marmots, made his fire with a bow and a drill, and he thought about killing an elk and tried to trap some, but then when he got close to him, he realized that wasn't probably such a good idea because he just had his knife on the end of a stick. But he did survive. He released 1 pigeon on Mount Ferry. He released 1 pigeon on Mount Carey, 1 pigeon on Mount Ferry, and 1 on Olympus, and 2 out of the 3 of them made it back. So but they were a little bit delayed, but they knew at least that he was still alive. But he did make it out. So we'll talk a little bit about the Chrysler Traverse, or the Bailey Traverse, as a lot of us know it. And that basically goes from Cat Basin down the Olympics to Kimptuck Basin. And on the way, the first night, you often stay here at Swimming Bear Lake. Beautiful place. Not always so much snow around, depending on the season, of course. Get a nice look at Olympus. And on the way to Swimming Bear Lake, you'll go by Hot Cake Camp, which was one of Chrysler's shelters. He had a series of shelters that he built along the Traverse. Some of them log shelters, some of them just pole shelters that you use a tarp with, and then you have caches at those with 5-gallon cans in them with sleeping bags in them, some food and cooking utensils, and he used those in the 40s when he was filming all the Olympic elk. So Hot Cake Camp was one of them. And this is what was left of Hot Cake Camp when I saw it in probably the late 80s. And that grill on the bottom is the Hot Cake Camp grill. That came out of the Olympic Hot Springs building after it burnt down. And Carl Shuffle and Billy Everett gave it to Herb Chrysler to have, and he packed it, probably weighed about 125 pounds. He packed it up to Hot Cake Camp. And if you look at some of the old books on this, you'll see that the Hot Cake Camp was quite a shelter. And then on the way from Swing Bear Lake, you can go to Mount Carey. And Mount Carey was named for Theodore Rickson's wife, Carey, who lived at Fairholme and was a painter and an artist. And it's about 7,000 feet high. And that too can be a nice day trip if you come up the Solduck and go over the catwalk to Carey and then go back along the High Divide and back down. Really nice trip. You can have lunch on the top of Carey. I didn't realize at the time that these flags from these Buddhist flags were on the top. That's pretty interesting. So from Carey, you go over, this is on the side slope of Carey. This is Dave Skinner, and he and I and Steve Coulter did the Beta Range one time. And what's interesting about this picture, you can essentially see the whole Bailey Range. If you start at the left-hand corner, that's the upper left-hand corner, that's the shoulder of Stephen. You can see next Mount Ferry, then Pulitzer, and go right along, see Chrysler's High Camp, and all the way around to where the traverse drops into the Queets Basin. This is Dan Weldon. He and I did the Beta Range one time. This is part of the side hills coming from Carey to Stephen. Pretty precarious, you have to be careful. Gene Turner knows that you have to be careful. We had to lift him out of there one time. And anyway, so this trip with Dan was probably the only time I thought I was going to get really hurt or killed in the Beta Range. A different part of this, and we were going from Meany to Noise, and on the route that we had selected, there was a rock face, which I thought I could do, and Dan was going the other way, and I got out on a ledge that just petered out, and I couldn't go back, and going up was not very good, but made it. But the drop was about 200 vertical feet, and so it was, and I had a full pack on, so it was a little bit touch and go. But anyway, we had a good trip. This is at 11 Bull Basin. Looking at Olympus, this is one of the stops between Carey and Mount Stephen on your way doing the traverse heading south. Some nice waterfalls in there. You often see elk and goat in this basin. This is Chrysler's Lake, or as Gene Turner and I say, Turnbank Lake. And this is a lake that we've been to, and it's a part of the traverse, and you can go down to the lake and up over the right-hand corner of that, around Mount Stephen and down into Cream Lake Basin. And here's Hannah on the trip that she and I did, looking at Ferry Basin and Mount Ferry, and Cream Lake Basin, which you've heard a lot about, is down to the right, and so is Billy Everett Lake. And Billy Everett Lake was named for Billy Everett, who we've talked about before, but at age 79, Herb Chrysler took him in to Cream Lake Basin, and they named that lake, named Billy Everett Lake for Billy Everett, and that was, Billy Everett was 79. He had named Cream Lake years before because of the color of the lake. And I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of that. Somewhere I do, but I couldn't find it. This is down by Cream Lake. There's this hollowed out tree cache that Chrysler had. He kept tools in there and food and sleeping bags and stuff. And it's set back in the woods. He also had a very formal log cabin shelter there of such that in 19 49 got wiped out by an avalanche, so it's not there. You can just see some remnants of the logs. But Herb Chrysler used this a lot, and if you look real close, you might see him. So this is Herb Chrysler at age 80. He did the whole Bailey Traverse with Don McQuaid and some other people. This was 1973 he did that. His pack weighed 68 pounds when he did that trip. Wow. I can't believe it. But anyway, he got inside his cache, and this is a picture, actual picture of him inside that cache. So this is Ferry Basin itself, the Mount Ferry, lots of little tarns there, wonderful places to camp, beautiful spot, one of John Seaman's favorite places. This is a lake between Pulitzer and Mount Ferry, and is open most of the time, not all the time, sometimes it's frozen over. This is Lone Tree Pass. We're still just heading south now. This is Lone Tree Pass early in the morning. It's a beautiful spot. Just as you get into the central Bailey Range, and the Goldie drops off 1,000 feet on one side, and then there's a nice valley to the west on the other, and it's just a nice place to set up a little camp. I usually carry a small tarp like that so I can sit underneath it if it's raining and get out of a tent, and I find that very, very helpful also for sun. This is at Chrysler's High Camp, right in the middle of the Bailey Range. Drops off about 1,000, 2,000 feet on either side of this particular place. He had a food cache here and some pools, but no formal log camp as such like he had in some of the other places. Beautiful view of Mount Olympus there. This is Scott there's a lot of snowfields up in the Bailey Range, and this is Scott doing on one of them. This is by Ragamuffin and Urchin Peak Spires on the left, and Mount Childs is just off the picture to the left. This is Dodwell-Rickson Pass down here in the lower right. You've probably heard of that. You've heard of Dodwell-Rickson, they're surveyors. But the Dodwell-Rickson Pass is one of the escape routes out of the Bailey Range in bad weather. So this is taken from Bear Pass looking down into the Queet Basin. That's Mount Queets in the background. And from there, from Dodwell-Rickson Pass, you can go down the Snowfinger, which takes you down to the Elwha. It's about 1.5 miles. This particular year, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of avalanche debris coming off the hillside. And this was a trip I did with Scott. And a few years ago, this was completely dry, no snow. And Keith Thompson said in 1941, there was no snow either, which is hard to believe back then. There was no snow, it said it was completely dry. So if you don't go down the Snowfinger, but you go into the Queets, you go into Queets Basin, and this is John Seamans at age 69 in the Queets Basin, one of his favorite campsites, and that's Humes Glacier in the background there. And John, Bill Kittner and Kelsey Kittner, Mark Redland, and Dave and Martha Chance had just spent 3 days over by Mount Olympus climbing all the peaks, and then they'd come over to Queets Basin on their way out, heading back up the Bailey Range to Mount Ferry and Dodger. But I would just say again that John was a wonderful guy, an inspiration. And one of the stories I like is when he was taking the Luther League kids in the Bailey Range, Hugh Kittner, Bill's father, would go get hamburgers downtown, get in his airplane, fly over the kids and drop the hamburgers down to them. This is one of the pools in the Queets. Very nice place to cool off. This is Mount Queets and Queets Glacier, and the Queets in the basin just below Queets. Very nice straight dip out of the basin itself. This is one of Chrysler's old camps in the Queets. He had a very formal log shelter there. This is back in the 40s, and they would build a fire outside the shelter, between the shelter and the rock, and the heat from the fire would just reflect off the rocks. He had 5-gallon cans here with some sleeping bag. Gene and I found this one time just by chance, and there was nails and the cans, cooking stuff, and some old sleeping bags lying around. But this was also wiped out by an avalanche in the probably late 40s, early 50s. I'm not totally sure on that. So then you get on to Meany Basin. This is Pensaman. Nice shot of Mount Meany and Meany Basin. From Meany you can go into Noise Basin. Another beautiful spot. And so, you go back a little bit, and this is Martha and me in '67 up on Grand Ridge, and just started some wonderful times in the mountains here. And then Hannah, Scott, and myself in Meany Basin. I had some marvelous trips with the kids, either just with one of them or both of them in the mountains, and with friends here with Gene Turner and Bill Rydell in the Queets. So in all of this in the Bailey Range, you're often looking at Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus was better known as the home of the gods. It was named by Captain John Mears on July 4th, 1778. It's 7,995 or so feet tall. The summit block you can see sticking up there is quite an experience. At least it was for me with Skinner and no rope. And Skinner is, as far as I'm concerned, is a mountain goat in disguise. And but we had a great trip that trip. So then, when all is said and done, time to go for a walk in the park. So thank you very much.
To show you how generous Sam and I were on our hikes. When we were on, in particular, one hike down the Bailey Range, we were, of course, with our shirts, which is the way you saw us all the time. And in those days, the mountain goats were very friendly. And we were very friendly. We were sweaty, so we'd let the mountain goats. Oh, by the way, all Park Service personnel, past and present, please close your ears when you come up. We would let the goats just come up and lick our backs and our arms, let them have all the salt they wanted.